Hey, good morning, everyone. I'm really sorry not to be there physically, but it was such a pleasure to listen to you and to join this panel and see what amazing work other cities are doing. I'm going to try to share with you our comprehensive strategy for protecting our public housing heritage through renovation and social innovation. Our approach is grounded in a fundamental policy shift that happened in this term in 2022 when basically we decided to stop the selling of public housing stock and instead invest in its renewal and expansion. That was the first sort of paradigm shift that I want to talk to you about, which is again stopping the alienation and selling of public housing. Our administration approved this resolution that reversed nearly a decade of public asset disposal. I think one of the reasons why many European cities are facing a housing crisis is in the late 90s, early 2000s. Many national countries thought that housing wasn't a problem anymore. In Italy, for example, 70% of the population are homeowners and only 30% rents a home. And there really hasn't been national funding for housing policies since the 90s, when there was this tax that used to fund the construction and restoration of public housing was cut, and limits on the cost of rent were also cut. And so since the 90s, city halls really haven't received stable public funding for housing. And so what many cities would do would be to sell the housing stock in order to have enough funds to continue renovating and restoring that same housing stock in order to continue to assign it to families that were in the list for public housing. And this, of course, has greatly reduced the stock of public housing that we have all over Italy. Our city as well used to sell a lot of its public housing. And so it was quite a groundbreaking decision at the beginning of this term to stop this procedure and to say, we don't have public national funding, fair, but we need to concentrate everything on not selling our public housing anymore and put our city funds into this. And use any measure possible to instead start renovating housing and start inverting that trend of sort of public disinvestment on the housing issue. We have to be at the forefront of a public expenditure on social and public housing. And so we made our housing plan for this year for this term with it has actually an idea of 10 years of an evolution of public housing expenditure, and it's over 200 million euros. So really unprecedented funding from the city onto public housing. It's really what has been invested in the last 40 years. We're now putting it all together in the next to really try and start to invert that trend that I was telling you about. So, of course, first we stopped selling, and then we had to say, okay, how are we going to resort to having zero vacancy in our public housing? That's the second very important measure that we're working on. As many cities in Italy and I guess all over Europe, we had hundreds and hundreds, some cities in Italy have thousands of empty public housing, even though we have thousands of people that are waiting for a public home to be assigned to them, and they have the regular criteria to have that home assigned to them. But again, there hadn't been any national funding to renovating those units. And so we put communal city hall funds and also the European resources of the Fond Metro Plus system that again helps metropolitan cities with social measures and is part of the social cohesion funds of Europe to into this plan, which is our zero vacancy in public housing. And we have already renovated the first 339 apartments. They are now being assigned. So far, we are on the plan to by the end of this term, which is 2027, reach this milestone for our city, which would be to have zero vacant public home apartments in our city. We currently have 12,000 apartments. And so again, an idea of really trying to invert the trend and put all the funding we can on public housing so that we have none that are empty. One of the problems is these units are often very, very old. Most of our buildings were constructed right after the Second World War. And still the majority of them were built before 1990. So of course, when you do renovate them, it's really quite costly in trying to give them more modern standards and bring them, even in terms of energy efficiency into the modern time. So it's always quite costly. And one thing that I want to mention that we are working on also an alliance with Athens, with Barcelona, with Paris, with many other cities, is in the Mayors for Housing Alliance, where we are bringing proposals to the European Union. We really want to keep social housing and social justice together with climate justice, because we know very well that when you renovate public housing, you are lowering emissions, and that's so important in cities like mine that have faced floods and climate crisis in these years. But it's also very important for social justice. We know that those are the buildings where energy poverty hits the most. Tenants in our public housing may pay a very low rent when they finally are able to access public housing. But if they have gas bills or energy bills that are very costly, hundreds and hundreds of euro, because that building was built, in the 50s and never renovated anymore, then again, we have a problem of poverty, energy poverty, right where poverty and social injustice hit the most. And so we have put in program this plan for a sustainable future of our public housing, and we have so far requalified 3,287 units. And that is a great investment of really a total of 120 million euro together on all the units and investments that we've put together and have come back even with the costs of energy, and of course saving thousands of cubic meters of CO2, which is very, very important, of course. We have now started again working on the measures as other cities are doing of regulating Airbnb. For us, it's very difficult to do so without a national law, but we are, as other cities, trying to use urban planning laws that have allowed us to regulate in some areas of the city using the urban planning powers that are of the city. And now we are working with the region to try and have even more regulation of Airbnb and tourist platform, because we've seen, of course, as many other cities, such a change, such an increase of apartments that were for normal long-term rent and are now on short-term rent. We're trying to say we don't demonize the use of one apartment from, our citizens that really might have that as an only source of income that integrates a very low income, since job pays have stayed the same in the last 30 years in Italy. But we can't have multinationals or single property owners that have tens or hundreds of apartments on Airbnb. So again, with the Mayors for Housing Group, we are also asking Europe to have stricter implementation of tourist platform regulations, because we should reach the principle, we believe, one home, one host. You shouldn't have tens or hundreds of apartments on a platform that was thought to be for, uh, sharing your home once in a while, and instead becomes, exploitation of homes in our city. Another thing we're trying to work on, and I'll come to a close, is the urban planning platform for new social housing. We are building new social housing as a city, but we also ask that private constructors have to give 20 or 30% of social housing with our new regulation, depending on how big their construction intervention is. And so we hope that that will sort of take on a new idea and new presence of social housing in our city. So again, we really believe public housing has to have this integrated vision where we are working both on public housing, renovation, social justice, climate justice, and not just new social and public housing, which is important when you can do so, regenerating areas and not consuming new soil, of course, but also renovating the vacant property that we have so much in our cities. And so we also need a European alliance. And I think this is why it's particularly important that cities like ours are talking about this together and trying to invert decades of disinvestment on public housing. Thanks again for the opportunity.